they took that term and they used it as a slogan. So you would hear Ami Razakar, Tumi Razakar. We are Razakars, you're Razakars. And they used it as a slogan to galvanize the sport. And then Sheikh Hasina said, look at these terrorists. They're proud of wanting to undermine the state and things like that. But Gen Z, one of the great abilities of this generation is being able to see through a lot of the BS.
And welcome to another podcast by the Conflict Law Center. Today we are very happy to be joined by our resident expert Oves Anwar, who will be talking to us about what is going on in Bangladesh. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So my first question is essentially for the people who haven't been following this conflict, including myself. So what is happening in Bangladesh?
Okay, so let me begin with full disclosure. My wife is Bangladeshi. I've lived in Bangladesh. I've had formative years there, so it has a very soft spot in my heart. So I've been following this quite a bit. In Bangladesh, what was happening essentially was that for the past 15 years, you had an autocratic government which had the sham elections every 5 years, and Sheikh Hasina's Awami League had taken over power, and this was brokered through the military initially 15 years ago, and then she just kept on retained power and effectively crippled any real opposition.
Okay.
She did this through numerous means, legal changes. She had a lot of political persecution that was taking place. So people were jailed. Khaleda Zia, who was the leader of the BNP, the largest opposition party, she was jailed. Family members were jailed. Party members were jailed. And perhaps one of the most draconian measures that she took was members of the Jamaat-e-Islami were tried for alleged involvement in the 1971 war of independence that they had. And their collusion with, say, the Pakistan Army at that time. Numerous very elderly members of the Jamaat-e-Islami were then given the death penalty and hung. Other things that she also did was she used very repressive tactics. So several years ago, there were people from religious parties and religious groups that were protesting. She had a complete blackout, and she developed this unit called the Rapid Action Battalion, the RAB. And this battalion came in and used this, overwhelming force and violence against these protesters with complete blackout. Media, electricity, everything was cut off. And allegations go up that it could be, several thousand that she killed in that. But well over, 1,000 is what the estimates are. And nothing really happened. So she had this iron grip on Bangladesh. Interestingly, this particular the revolution the thing that sparked it this time. So you had all this baggage, 15 years of repression. What allowed her to sustain that was great economic indicators.
Yeah.
Right? So she did really well for the Bangladeshi economy.
Their GDP became
rose,
very high,
got millions out of poverty or improved standards of living. Bangladesh, if you see it now, it's you can feel the difference. But at the same time, rights and the freedoms were completely, being trampled upon. And so, in this context, you had an issue where, and you also at this stage, despite good economic indicators and a growing economy, you had a mass unemployment, especially for the youth.
Okay.
Now, in this context, you had this law which gave a 30 to 40% quota, I don't exactly remember the numbers, a quota for descendants of freedom fighters. So in the 1971 war, the Mukti Bahini and people, their descendants, would be given preferential quotas for government jobs, education, and things like that.
Okay.
Right? Now this, people who weren't members of that, especially students in universities who are now going to be entering the job market, they protested.
Oh, they were protesting against the quota.
Exactly. So that's how it started, right? It was against the quota, and then she made some very silly statements, right? She basically said there was a journalist. The thing that really sparked the things. There was a press conference happening. Sheikh Hasina. She was asked a question somewhere along the lines of, what about the children of non-freedom fighters or something along those lines. And what rights should they have? So she says, why do people think that only Razakars, children, are intelligent and should be given these positions? Are the children of freedom fighters not intelligent? And should they not be given these? Now, what this implication was that you were either a freedom fighter, and if you weren't, then all of you were Razakars. Now, Razakar is the term that is used for collaborators with the Pakistan Army. So it was traitors, really.
Okay.
So she basically labeled the entire population of Bangladesh, especially students who were maybe protesting at this time, as as being traitors, essentially.
Okay.
And that was something that really, and they took that term. Razakar is a negative, obviously, term, right?
Yeah.
It was you're a collaborator, you're a traitor to the nation in a sense. They took that term and they used it as a slogan, right? So you would hear "Ami Razakar, Tumi Razakar." We are Razakars, you're Razakars. And they used it as a slogan to galvanize the support. And then Sheikh Hasina said, look at these terrorists. They're proud of wanting to undermine the state and things like that. But Gen Z, one of the great abilities of this generation is being able to see through a lot of the BS, right, and the propaganda that comes out of governments. They're able to fact check. Their access to knowledge is phenomenal. So they knew that what Sheikh Hasina is saying isn't really chiming with.
And I guess you're like 50 years on from that, right? So this new generation, they're like, no, we want equal opportunities for all. I guess that's what they want.
Absolutely. And that really was the fundamental. Now, interestingly enough, protests happened. She clamped down really hard, and several dozens of people were killed. Students were killed, and there were these really graphic images that were coming out in the media. There were posters that were so people were made into heroes, and especially people who had died, they were made into martyrs for this cause. So a movement started. Suddenly overnight, you almost had this movement where it's not about the quota anymore. It's about the way that the government is treating us, right?
Right.
And so interestingly, what happens after that is that the Bangladeshi Supreme Court strikes down the quota law. It says this quota should not exist at this level, right? And so basically the issue didn't exist anymore. At the time I thought, okay, this is now gonna die out.
This would save her.
Exactly, this is gonna save her, and probably she had some, obviously the judiciary was somewhat compliant. We've seen this in the past in Bangladesh, where the judiciary has been compliant to her government. We thought, this must have been just her way of saving face. So, but what happened was that the protest didn't die out. Right? They said, no, we want justice for the hundreds that you've killed. Right? And so it became a different movement. And then what happened was that it started off with students, but it spread throughout the country. And you started having these mass protests happening all across the country simultaneously in different cities, in different areas. And later on, you had the military. There was a lot of pressure on the military. Now, generally in South Asia and stuff, you don't have the military involved in shooting your own people, right? These were pre-colonial things. And so the military at this time basically had to take a decision, even though the army chief was related by marriage to Sheikh Hasina, right? And he took the decision that we will not oppose the people. The remarkable thing about that this generation and this first Gen Z movement was that students were able to almost create like this unified chain of command. It wasn't necessarily individuals, but it was agreeing upon certain principles, right? And so they created, initially they had a 9-point demand, right? We want an apology, we want you to resign, we want these particular ministers to go, and we want all of these things reversed and people to be released and whatnot, right? Now, Sheikh Hasina was not agreeing to that. So these protests intensified, and then she tried to have negotiations with them, and then she tried to soften her approach after killing so many people.
Right.
She says, "My doors of the Prime Minister's house are open to you, and you can visit any time." And that was already too late, too late by that time. And so the protests took place. The army chief said, "We are not going to oppose the people of Bangladesh." And now it wasn't just students. It was like regular people who were out on the streets. Literally, people were calling people out to come down from your buildings. Let's go for the protest, right? And Dhaka is this massive metropolis, and people were coming from outside and from all over, and they basically descended upon the Prime Minister's house, and they took over government. Now, initially, when things like this, when a revolution takes place, you have levels of violence that are there, and that certainly there was revenge killings because Sheikh Hasina, not only did she use the police and RAB, that Rapid Action Battalion, and perhaps even the military, I'm not exactly sure, to suppress these things. She also used her student wing of her party, so they're known as the Chhatra League.
Okay.
Right? So she used those thugs, basically goons and thugs, against the protesters. So these were also students or ex-students, people who were involved in student politics and stuff, and they used those, armed them, they had ammunition, things like that. At the same time,
revenge was inflicted against them.
Against them, and you had people say being hung from bridges and things like that. So the initial immediate thing. Then what you also had is that there was a movement of there was a identification of people who were supporters of the Awami League. So it could be leaders of industry or people who own banks and financial institutions.
The Awami League is her party?
Sheikh Hasina's party. So people who supported her, who may have been, part of the elite that was benefiting from this government, they were then also targeted. So their houses were burnt, their cars were burnt. I remember seeing videos of people going to people's houses and showing, this bag costs 10 lakh taka, right?
Okay.
And basically shaming them that, our country is going through poverty, that we have so much unemployment, and that these elite live like this, right? And of course, there's mass disparities all over South Asia, but also in Bangladesh as well. And so you saw, these mansions being put to fire. At the same time, we now see, the shift happening, where the army chief apparently goes in, makes Sheikh Hasina resign, dissolves parliament, and she then escapes. Now, initially, what we were told was that, or what the understanding was, that she didn't want to leave. Right? She said, I want to make a statement. They said, there's no time for a statement.
Okay.
Like, literally, the mob is coming, right? The protesters are coming.
Yeah.
So she said, okay, then take me to Kumilla cantonment, which is near the border with India. Right? So she said, take me over there and I'll be there. They said, there's no way. You're going to leave the country.
Okay.
So then she flew into India. And India has always been a very good friend of Bangladesh's. Has always been a very good friend of Sheikh Hasina's.
Okay.
And many allege that much of her 15 years, she was getting a lot of support in orchestrating this control over the country with India and especially with Indian intelligence there. There are a lot of allegations that Indian troops were brought in to suppress this current violence as well. And that there were images of them leaving then from the airport and from other places once the violence or once the government was toppled. I think the military had an important role to play despite these linkages and stuff like that. If the military hadn't done this could have become a much more bloody revolution than it already was. They could have been, it could have been dragged on for a lot longer. Another interesting aspect of this was that there were suspicions that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, so Sheikh Hasina's left. She's in India right now. But there's still, components of her governance structure still there, right? So there were allegations that, or there was suspicions that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would say that whatever caretaker setup you're doing or this removal of Sheikh Hasina is unconstitutional. Because obviously, right, Sheikh Hasina, she, like Pakistan, there used to be a caretaker mechanism between governments. Sheikh Hasina abolished that. So whatever system comes up, it's not elected, so it's not according to the constitution, right? And since there is no caretaker mechanism anymore, it would have been technically unconstitutional. So what students did was that they went in, they occupied the Supreme Court building, and they demanded, that the Chief Justice as well as other judges of the Supreme Court resign, right? And I think the deadline was 3 p.m. and by 3:15, 6 judges and the Chief Justice resigned.
They resigned.
Okay. And they had another Chief Justice appointed in his place, right? Someone who was very well respected.
It's so interesting, even the story about her fleeing and the pictures that we saw of a man on a flagpole with the Bengali flag with hundreds, it looked like thousands, like tens of thousands of people around him. It almost seems like it's from a bygone era. It's like the Romanovs or something from a prior revolution with like the October uprising or whatever happened in Russia. And to see those, it's quite exhilarating to see. But the students seem to put on it was a mass uprising, which seems in some ways spontaneous, but very well organized.
Absolutely. I think this is something that you have to give their generation. So this was a Gen Z, when they dub it the first Gen Z revolution, it really was, right? They used social media. They were so effective in that, in their critique in the initial days to get people on board this platform. In how to organize, in getting through their demands, making it public, and all of them getting videos out there to show the world the atrocities. Right?
And to bring the country with them because it feels still like they have a lot of support.
Absolutely, exactly.
So, sorry, I cut you off when you were talking about the Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, so they resigned. They replaced it with so now the Supreme Court isn't creating any real issue. Of course, you're in a state, where you don't know how to go about this, right? So, do you need to have like a interim constitution? Is the caretaker government going to? How long is it supposed to last? Now, the opposition parties obviously want the caretaker to have a shorter period, right? Because they want to now get back into regular politics and rehabilitate it. But the student movement really doesn't care about old politics, right? They're not. They didn't do this with the old guard. I'm sure there were elements of that wanted retribution and wanted to, get back at Awami League from the other political parties. But the students have said that we want a longer caretaker government, maybe 3 to 5 years or something along these lines. It's also interesting who they've selected in this caretaker government. So the best and the brightest in Bangladesh, across the board for whichever sector you're looking at. So, Dr. Yunus, who's leading this with Grameen Bank, and he started this Nobel laureate, phenomenal individual, very well respected globally. He was someone that was targeted by Sheikh Hasina. Like, imagine a Nobel laureate being like, she put cases on him. Basically, he had to leave the country because of that. So he comes in. Importantly, everybody accepted these few names, right? And so it was this coalescing of opinions and of people that really was
proper technocracy.
Exactly. And that's something that I think can really take Bangladesh forward. And it's really impressive how they've done it. Another issue, you mentioned the visuals that were coming out. I think some of the artwork that's come out, right, has been just phenomenal. Like, if you see some of the posters, how they've used some of the symbolism from 1971 to show their freedom struggle right now. So there's this image of Yahya Khan who's made into a demon, right? And so they did this with Sheikh Hasina. They made her into a similar demon in the same color scheme and things like that. Then many of the people who were martyred, using their images, it really, I think, was a revolution of the youth. Right? And they were able to push that through, get it done. So I'm thoroughly impressed with what they've been able to achieve.
So on that note, as someone who doesn't know nearly enough about what's happening in Bangladesh, to my shame, I did stumble upon this article by a journalist called Akya in the Asia Times. And I wanted to ask you about this. I know you haven't read this article, and it paints what happened in Bangladesh as a color revolution. So color revolutions are those instigated or in some way orchestrated by the CIA. And I have to admit, it is a little bit threadbare in why the US has been involved in this, but just to read something out in terms of why would the US bother. There is a significant strategic geopolitical advantage to be garnered from taming and managing the riparian economy of Bangladesh, with the northern parts of the country offering perfect topography for aerial incursions into the soft underbelly of China, to the southeast of the Tibetan Sichuan region, an area that China has ruled to the point of being entirely complacent about potential military risks. Now, so that's what he says. That's why it's important, because China is in Myanmar and because the US wants to buttress India and Bangladesh kind of against China. And so the reasons he believes that the US has stepped up the ante, and the reasons pointing to this being a color revolution, including the fact that this is what we see in other color revolutions, so this is the same. Mass protests triggered by a specific issue that the host government would normally have considered a minor niche item. Active participation in multiple social groups, usually led by younger people, but soon spreading across society to hitherto unpolitical groups. Significant use of technology, in particular secure communication apps. Generous and unexplained funding, usually emanating from new bank accounts of recently established charities and NGOs. Random news designed to incite more participants, and in particular the use of graphic images of rape involving young women and images or videos of authority figures causing grievous bodily harm or even dismembering bodies.
Yeah, so I don't see how any of this is couldn't like any of this is that it had to be the CIA who did this, right? Like, first of all, let's say we accept that all of this happened, that there was funding through these new charities and things like that.
And I thought it was interesting because you brought up the Jamaat before, and he talks about the fact that he thinks that they might have been funded by the US, the Jamaat Islami.
So a lot of
I do think it is a little bit threadbare, but in terms of what you think the regional and wider global implications of this, the revolution
so there are a bunch of things that come up. A lot of these are, frankly, Indian talking points that are being mentioned. This is what Sheikh Hasina, once she reached India, this is what the allegation she made. She accused the US of this.
And it's also something that we hear a lot in South Asia. So a good way to discredit people, to accuse them of working with the US.
Exactly. And what I also think it does is I think it's just very lazy, right? It's lazy in the sense that it tries to discredit the indigenous movement, and it tries to downplay the level of frustration and resentment that the people had with Sheikh Hasina's government. This was not a pleasant atmosphere of society. There was, huge droves of people who had left the country because of the type of oppression that was taking place. Right. She had these black sites where people are now emerging after 8 years of complete incognito detention. Right. Their families didn't know they were alive, and now you're suddenly seeing people who are emerging from these particular cells and things like that. This was, the entire state was involved in this type of thing, this type of system criminality, if you will. There was immense corruption that was taking place, if not directly by Sheikh Hasina, certainly her sister was playing a major role, Sheikh Rehanna, in this thing. I mean, the industry leaders who were supporting her would be getting these massive benefits, right? And the hope was that, money would trickle down to the rest of the country, but that really wasn't happening in that sense. You weren't creating the jobs, you were doing that. The textile sector was doing very well, but not much else, right? So they had billions in exports increases, but a young, well-educated, group, Gen Z, was emerging, entering the job market, and not finding really anything that they could be part of. So accusing the US also doesn't really make a lot of sense. One, Sheikh Hasina was a very good friend to India. And India has, with its 7 sisters and the chicken neck, the 7 sisters, the 7 states on the eastern side of Bangladesh, and the thin area above it, which connects India to the 7 sisters. That has always been a weak point for India, a choke point for India. And India is always worried about Bangladesh and whether it has been used as a way to create insecurity in the 7 sisters.
Right.
And there have been allegations in the past where Bangladesh has, or Bangladeshi ministers or Bangladeshi officials have, pushed through weapons to support militants or indigenous movements there. They've also, allegations have been made that they've given safe haven to militants who are fighting Indian forces in those areas. The second issue is the chicken neck, right? That's something where you can cut off Indian control of that area, especially with the Chinese. So that is something of strategic concern to the Indians. So the best, if what we see the US playing this role of trying to balance China through India, the best way they could have supported that is by having India not have to worry about its eastern flank.
By having not a revolution.
Not a revolution, by having that same thing. And I don't think that having a base that could strike into China's underbelly outweighs really this massive benefit to India in this sense, right? And secondly, it's a huge leap to go from Muhammad Yunus becoming this Nobel laureate, becoming the head of Bangladesh, and now suddenly having US bases in Bangladesh. It doesn't happen like that, right?
Yeah.
So I think
even one of so I feel like he's trying to tie a few loose threads together, but one of the reasons he also gave was that the judges passing the order have their children living or studying in the US. And I was like, dude, that's almost every family in this Indian subcontinent. I don't think that would make sense.
It's not like they're holding a gun to his head or anything. He's making statements. He's in fact accusing the US sitting in the US. So I really don't think that the US was really behind this. I think you need to give credit to the students. And then to the people of Bangladesh in general. They were sick and tired of this. There were opposition parties that were also really they had been decimated, and they were trying to get back into some semblance of normal democracy in the country. And I think her time had come. So I think there were a number of factors that played. We know that the most disinformation out of this entire thing has come from India, right? Putting articles out like this in respectable journals may also be part of that strategy, right? Of course. So that's something that we need to be careful about when we're reading about the situation in Bangladesh. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be rosy, but I think it's a much better beginning for Bangladesh.
Implications for foreign policy from Bangladesh's perspective?
So I think there are a number of factors. One, India has been supporting Bangladesh for quite some time. And that may be reduced significantly now. Because this government, if not open animosity, the people are not happy. You know, the word, I mean, on the street, they're not happy with India. I think this is also a reaction to this approach that Jay Shankar, India's external affairs minister, really tried to push, was having this robust regional policy. Right. Tackling Pakistan especially, and completely trying to isolate Pakistan, but also having this big brother attitude with the smaller South Asian countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives. And it's blown up in his face. Maldives is not a very pro-India country anymore.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, people are sick and tired of the government that they were propping up and they were supporting. So it's really been, I think, a failure of Indian foreign policy in this regard. And they're now panicking. You can see it in the statements that are coming out. You can see it in... Well, the real question is how much of this... how will they leverage their relationship with the US to influence this thing? Right now, the US has been very welcoming of the new government, but because of, I think, Indian influence, even Sheikh Hasina, when she had the sham election several months ago, the US initially put some sanctions on, but then they normalized relations to an extent.
Right, yeah.
So the US, I don't think it was such a big issue for the US to have actually intervened like this. I think they're okay with what's going to happen, but again, we have to see how much India will pressurize this and how hostile maybe Bangladesh will be to India.
Right.
I don't think it's in anyone's interest to have open hostilities or even bad foreign policy with India. I mean, Bangladesh, for example, is surrounded by three sides entirely by India, and then it has Myanmar. So there are a number of factors there. There's also the China factor, right? And that is something that I think the US will be concerned about. India will certainly be very concerned about. The Chinese have been trying to woo Bangladesh through economic packages and through other mechanisms. There's that small strip of India in between, but otherwise linkages between China and Bangladesh could be strengthened through that as well. Of course, there's the region isn't very hospitable to that, but that's certainly something that could happen there. So I think there are a lot of strategic implications here from a foreign policy perspective.
Yeah, and perhaps you can do this again in a few months when we see what's happening with the revolution. But thank you so much for giving your opinion. And thank you everyone for watching at home.